Okay, wrestling fans, it's time for another episode of PennLive's Wrestling Podcast. We got another special guest. I'm excited about this. Bob Flounders with Jim Carlson again. We want to welcome to the show. Remember, we've been talking about this. It's not just about the Penn State wrestling team. It's about we want to shine the light on Pennsylvania wrestling and excellence within the state. And we have on this episode, we have a true scholar athlete, former scholar athlete in the sense, Cumberland Valley grad and outstanding wrestler, Tristan Warner, a member of the 2010, I think 2010 was your last year, Cumberland Valley wrestling team. Later wrestled at Old Dominion. Now I believe he's involved with the National Wrestling Coaches Association. I think he's a budding writer, which I can't wait to talk to him about that. But it looks like he's got a lot going on in his life. But Tristan, we are thrilled to be able to talk with you about a bunch of things, including the Penn State team. But welcome to the show. Jimmy sent me a list. Usually he sends me a list of things he wants to talk about. He's so excited to talk about you. This thing was like 1,000 words long. So just get ready. We're going to ask you some questions, but they're all good ones. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This is a real privilege. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk wrestling.
Tristan went on to wrestle at Old Dominion, as Bob said. He was back-to-back winner of the NCAA Elite 89 award, given to the wrestler with the highest grade point average nationwide. That's a very prestigious award. He nearly hit the 100-win mark at ODU with 93. Decided to stay involved in the sport, writing articles for PA Power Wrestling, now involved with Win Magazine, based in Iowa, working with the NWCA, as we just said, in Mannheim. So Tristan, just tell us a little bit about all of that. And I'm sure I'm left some things out, but what was your major at ODU? Why have you opted to stay involved in the sport, and some information about what you're doing these days?
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate that. I've been just a diehard wrestling fan since the time I was probably 4 years old. My dad used to take us out to NCAAs on the Penn State Booster Club bus, actually, when I was like a 6-year-old kid. So I was almost like the little team mascot that was running around, and we would be at all the Booster Club meetings and everything. I actually grew up in State College for about 6 years before I moved to Cumberland Valley. Wrestling's always just been a huge part of my life. It was never something that I ever saw myself getting completely out of, even when my competitive career was over. But yeah, these days you kind of mentioned I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I always joke like I wear many hats in the wrestling community, and sometimes the roles even overlap a little bit. But yeah, I just recently, August 1st, took over as the editor of Win Magazine. So that's really exciting. That's a publication that I've read since I was literally a little kid on those Booster Club trips. I'd have one of those magazines reading the rankings and stuff like that. So that's really a cool full circle moment and an opportunity I'm really grateful for. Yeah, I help out with PA Power Wrestling with Jeff Upson from time to time when I can make it to some of those events. I work as a kind of a part-time contractor for the National Wrestling Coaches Association, which is also a cause that I really enjoy because I help out with the Wrestlers and Business Network and trying to help student athletes, high school or college, prepare for their future beyond the mat, which obviously, as you alluded to with my academics, like that was always something that was really important to me. Trying to be the best wrestler I could be, but also trying to keep that bigger picture mindset and just trying to be prepared for whatever was next. And that was something that was always, a goal of mine. And then in addition to that, I've had a couple coaching stints since I coached at Cumberland Valley High School for 1 year right after I moved back here from completing grad school at ODU. And I coached at Shippensburg University for 4 years, kind of as a volunteer assistant and not a full-timer, but I was there as much as I could be now that I live here in Shippensburg. And now I coach at the Anchor Wrestling Club, which is a K through 12 youth club. And I also run kind of like small group private sessions I've got like a core nucleus of about 10 to 12 kids that are real focused, dedicated kids. And we meet just like maybe once a week, twice a week if we can. So yeah, I'm super busy. I've also got, I live with my wife here, Jesse, here in Shippensburg with two and a half year old twin boys. So hopefully future wrestling partners someday, but we're not quite there yet. So in the meantime, I'm just keeping myself busy with as much wrestling as I can. My cup is about to overflow. I'm pretty full of wrestling duties here and there, but I'm trying to juggle them all and at least do a decent job at all of them.
Well, Tristan, working for Win, the pressure's on because Mike Finn asked a lot of questions in the national NCAA press conferences.
Mike just wrapped up like over 21 years, I think, stint as the editor at Win. And there are massive shoes to fill, especially coming in kind of brand new and also not really having like full-time journalist experience. Like I've been a writer for a long time. I've always really enjoyed writing. I freelance wrote for the magazine for the last seven plus years, but I kind of skipped like the actual journalist step and went to editor, which is, challenging because I'm still trying to learn all the ropes from Mike. And he's done a great job mentoring me, but there's so many things that Mike did over 21 years that I think just became second nature to him that he probably never even thought to like tell me about. That, for example, I showed up to the Penn State Iowa duel a couple weeks ago. It was kind of comical, but things were going wrong for me from the start. Like I didn't have a Wi-Fi hotspot. I couldn't get internet on my phone. I'm like, this is going to be kind of hard to, tweet updates and post my story at the end with no internet. And then I'm like, well, I don't actually have a picture either to go with my story. I probably should have talked to a photographer up front about this. And then I'm trying to find the press conference room. And I'm like, wow, I've got my work cut out for me. I've got some research to do. And hopefully with some experience, next year, I'll be a little better at this.
We're talking with Tristan Warner, CV grad, 2010. That would be Dave Heckard territory? Is that correct, Tristan? You were coached by him or no?
Yes, Dave Heckard. Yep, I moved to Cumberland Valley this summer after my 8th grade year from State College, actually, and I think it was Heckard's second or third season at CV, and obviously he had an awesome storied career there, and coached many years beyond my tenure there. Coached my brother the next 4 years because we kind of just missed each other. But yeah, Heckard was an awesome coach, an awesome influence on me. Still to this day, probably the best motivational coach that I've ever had. Like just when that guy got red in the face and right before you're going to run out in the mat, like it's corny, but you could run through a wall when that guy was giving you a pep talk. So
Tristan, I wanted to, before we get into some more questions and get into Penn State and some other things, I just wanted to follow up. I wanted to ask you about that Elite 89 award that you won a couple of times. When I think about wrestlers, just their focus and their discipline and their commitment, it's not like a lot of sports, right? Because you're trying. It's just you and another guy, right? It's not always a team sport, and there's so much more to it than just maybe the athleticism. But what I wanted to ask you about was that focus and that discipline. I have to think there's a carryover there when it comes to academics and studying, because you're budgeting your time, you're learning to do some things. And do you feel like one was kind of related to the other? My sense is I think there's a lot of wrestlers in college, especially that are very good students, and I just think that the perception of them sometimes to people who are not familiar with the sport is just not accurate. I think there's a lot there to a lot of wrestlers.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it because I always like to kind of talk about that. There's kind of two pieces to it. One, my whole wrestling story, and we don't have to spend that much time talking about all my background, but like there's kind of a parallel between the two. Like my wrestling story, I always tell kids that I coach this because I think it can be helpful and motivational for kids who maybe aren't experiencing the success that they want at a young age. But like when I was in 7th grade, actually at State College, I was JV on my junior high team. I didn't even get to wrestle. Like I was one of the kids in a shorts and t-shirt that would go out before the duel, and they'd like put you in the corner like 4 at a time, and like some dad would be reffing, and you'd get like maybe 5 matches a year. So for someone who had put so much time and effort into the sport from a very young age, like to not have very much success, it was somewhere along the way the light bulb went off, and it was like, if I'm going to keep doing this sport, which is so rigorous and so difficult, like I'm going to commit to it way harder than I have to this point. I'm not going to be kind of like the little chubby guy that like knows a lot of stats about wrestling, but can't actually go out and get my hand raised. There was basically like a light bulb moment went off after my 7th grade season, and just a huge transformation. I really committed hard to training all year round and lifting really hard and getting strong and all those kind of things that go with it. And so my trajectory of my career, obviously, like I didn't end up being like fantastic, but had enough success where like the proof was in the pudding that what you put into it is what you get out of it. And that's kind of always what I've thought about academics as well. I mean, my parents obviously put a lot of emphasis on the academic piece as well. Even in high school, I knew my mom was a single mom by that point with 4 kids. And like, if I wanted to go to college and wrestle, I was going to need to get a scholarship of some sort, or not want to take out all these loans. So it was like, I need to commit myself on and off the mat and just excel. Basically, I didn't really have a choice. It felt like, so when your back's against the wall like that, almost, it feels like you don't really have a choice. Like you have to get up and do the work, and you have to put the time in. And the second piece to it I was going to say is just the competitiveness. Like pretty much everybody who wrestles, I think, is competitive. Anybody who plays sports is competitive. But when you're just competitive as an individual, it's not just the wrestling piece, but it's like I had just the same burning desire to be to have the highest GPA in the country than I did to be the best wrestler. Like I wanted to be the Elite 89 award winner as bad as I wanted to be the national champion at my weight class. And I think you're right. There is kind of a perception that wrestlers are like dumb jocks, maybe, or something. I think more often than not nowadays, these days, especially like in the college level, a lot of these kids are like academic, really smart kids, and not just smart, but they really work hard, and they work hard in the classroom and on the wrestling mat. So yeah, I think that competitiveness in me was like, as much as I'm putting into getting 3 workouts in a day and picking my coach's brain to be the best wrestler, like I'm going to be doing the same thing with my academics. Like on Friday night, Saturday night, when other kids are going out and doing social stuff, like I was reading a textbook or Googling stuff about, just like almost like an insatiable thirst to like not just accumulate knowledge, but to like make sure that I'm like dominating in the classroom too, if that makes sense, which I'm sure that sounds like a really nerdy answer, but that's just kind of what my mindset was. Yeah, I was lucky. I was fortunate that it paid off for me. And like you said, there's a ton of other kids that were extremely academic. And when publisher Brian actually sent me yesterday in the old program, the NCAA program from last year at the bottom where it has all the former Elite 89 winners. And I was down there and he was making a joke about it. But I was looking at some of the other names and I'm just looking at it like the one kid, Clay Ream from North Dakota State, actually hosted him on his recruiting visit at ODU, but he went on to win the Elite 89 3 times, and he had a 4.0 in molecular biology and biochemistry or something like that. And I'm just laughing. I'm like, wow, my little communication criminal justice degree from Old Dominion kind of pales in comparison to him. So there's kind of levels to this award, but yeah, no, I was fortunate to win it, and it was really cool to be able to say that the hard work in the classroom paid off.
Tristan, Old Dominion dropped wrestling in 2020, and you had been gone for a while, but was it still a gut punch for you when that happened? And do you still feel when it happens today like it's happening now at Cleveland State?
Yeah, it was a gut punch. So I actually really hadn't been gone for all that long. At least it didn't feel like it, because I served as a grad assistant for 2 years after I graduated in 2015. So I was there up through the 2017 year, and I worked in the athletic department, which is even worse because every day I was working with all these people. In fact, the way I found out that it happened was my good friend that still works in the athletic department sent me the article, like I think like as they were publishing it. And literally it happened on April Fool's Day. So I was like, haha, yeah, nice try or whatever. I'm like, we had always kind of in the back of our minds thought like, could ODU be one of those programs that gets dropped? Like probably not, because we were a top 20 team almost every year that I was there, definitely top 30. We had multiple All-Americans almost every year that I was there. Like we had a pretty solid thing going there. And at least at the time, I felt like we had the backing of our athletic department. So, and even working in the athletic department, like I never had any kind of inkling that could happen. So yeah, I really thought it was an April Fool's joke at first, but as it kind of unfolded, it was like, wow, this is real. There'll be some day where my twin boys are old enough to, we could have walked in the ODU wrestling room and seen their dad's name up there or whatever. And that's never, they bulldozed it, I think, whatever, to build like a volleyball facility. So yeah, it's a gut punch and it's really a shame. The chances of it coming back are probably not great. So I think the better, Jason Bryant's still active and trying to, leverage that. But I think the better use of energy at this point now, like you alluded to, would be to try to help this not happen to other programs. So anything we can do to try to, continue to promote the sport, but also to try to back other programs that may be at risk or on the chopping block, as we've seen now with Cleveland State. I think Campbell is kind of on the fringe right now with the whole scholarship situation. So yeah, it's definitely a shame. And I think there's possibly some troubling times ahead with all this new NIL, and, teams are going to have these smaller mid-major type teams are going to have a harder time keeping up with all the money right now. So it's concerning for sure.
That was actually my next question with the revenue sharing and the scholarships, whether you think that more programs might be on a chopping block. And, is it a situation where the rich get richer and the ones struggling financially will continue to struggle?
I think there's a lot that remains to be seen. But yeah, it definitely is concerning. Like it was always a concern for us, even long before all of this happened, just trying to compete. And, I think there's similar discussions in football too, with the whole, some of these smaller teams might go undefeated during the regular season, but like their chances of cracking that, college football playoff or whatever is difficult. So yeah, I think troubling times are ahead. I can only hope that the powers that be will continue to try to work towards solutions where, and I don't know what those solutions would be. You have guys like Doug Schwab at Northern Iowa that are doing an amazing job with like a not big time Power 5 program, and but that's kind of not the norm. So I don't know. It would be awesome if there was a way that, and I don't know that like separating them is the answer or not, because I think personally it's awesome every year at NCAAs to see some guy from like Campbell or some small school make the podium, and that's just like an awesome moment to celebrate, especially knowing that like that guy probably didn't have the same resources that those guys in the Big 10 or Big 12 had, and like for him to make it is almost like an added challenge. So I really hope there's a way that they can come up with that these smaller schools are able to not only stay intact as a program, but be able to still compete at the Division 1 level. But to be honest, I don't know what the future looks like. I'm just kind of, it's like when you're on a roller coaster, you just close your eyes and hold your breath and hope for the best.
We're moving right along here on the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. Bob Flounders, Jim Carlson with our special guest, Tristan Warner, CV grad, Old Dominion, three-time, I don't want to bury this team, three-time NCAA qualifier, two-time winner of the Elite 89 award given to the I guess, the highest GPA, the best grade point average that year. A tremendous award. He's won it twice. Tristan, let's talk a little bit about Penn State wrestling. We could just start with this current team. They got one duel left against American at home, but it's really about the postseason now, whether it's the Big Tens and then the Nationals, which are in Philadelphia, which is great. But since you grew up as a Penn State wrestling fan, what stands out to you most about this particular Penn State?
I just think Penn State's wrestling team continues. It's almost like when you're already at the top, people say like there's no place to go but down. But with them, they just still keep finding ways to go up, which is almost like defying the laws of physics or something. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of discussion that this year's team may be the best ever. You see that a lot on like Twitter and stuff like that. And they already broke the points total record at the tournament last year, and they might break it even further this year. I mean, it's insane. Like here at Win, every weekend I have to compile we call it the Tournament Power Index, which is the TPI ranking. It basically simulates how many points they will score at the NCAA tournament based on where they're ranked. So it doesn't really factor in bonus points so much, but it's more like, if your guy's ranked first at the weight class, he's assigned 20 points. So, it's kind of meant to break down based on where you think guys will finish based on the ranking. And Penn State, their ranking actually dropped by like 4 or 5 points in this week's edition just because Lillidahl fell a little bit. And they still have, I think, 143.5 points, and the second place team, Iowa, had 90. So, I mean, it's almost like unprecedented levels of domination. And the thing I guess that stands out to me is not only what you see on the mat this year. Everybody's seen that. Everybody's watched their matches and sees how good they are and how dominant they are. But what's almost scary is how many more stars are waiting in the wings to step in future years. So much so to the point where it's almost like some of these weights, it's like, where are these guys going to fit? Like there's 3 or 4 guys that are like, former world team members that could be at the same weight class. It's mind blowing, really. I'm sure they'll find a way to figure it out. That's why they do what they do, and they do it so well. But yeah, I think like it's almost scary for how much better the future could be for them. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting postseason for anyone who's a Penn State fan. But I think it could be even more exciting in years to come.
Tristan, expanding on that a little bit, Penn State's last recruiting class was excellent, right? Next year's is quite good as well. Oklahoma State's incoming class is very good. Iowa moving forward with Bo Bassett, a couple others, and a few other schools are quite good. My point is, and I'm taking a long time to make it, are you pleased with how many wrestlers coming out of high school are ready to make that step to collegiate action? Really across all divisions, but there seem to be an inordinate number of high school studs these days college ready. Do you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. I was going to say, well, one, it's good for the sport, honestly. Like, I know Penn State fans or Iowa fans or whoever like wants every single stud to go to their team, but at the end of the day, you only have 10 starting lineup slots. So like, it is really good for the sport in general. And I know maybe some Penn State fans wouldn't want to hear stuff like, well, it's good for, kids to go to Oklahoma State or Bassett to go to Iowa. But at the end of the day, like Penn State winning the NCAAs by 50, 60 points every year is, long-term not super healthy for the sport. So like, it is good to see that happening. And it's good to have other teams kind of make revivals, so to speak. Like Oklahoma State had been down for a couple years, but I think with David Taylor leading the program there, like they're going to be back up to the level where in a short amount of time where they're going to be competitive at least with Penn State. I don't know if they'll beat them necessarily, but I'm saying them kind of picking up some of these good recruits is it's good for the sport. That's just one point to make. But two, to your second point, Jim, yeah, I'm actually as the editor of Win, I'm actually tasked with writing some of the articles, like the feature article in the NCAA program for this year. So that's actually what I'm working on right now. It's actually due at the end of this week, but I'm really focusing on how amazing it is on top of at the surface level for guys like Carter Starachi to be in consideration to win 5 NCAA titles, but also guys like Gable Steveson and Keegan O'Toole, possibly depending on him and Levi are probably going to go at it, but it's the point I'm trying to make is that it feels like increasingly harder for guys to win multiple titles, especially as they age into their career, just because the kids, I mean, one, staying healthy is a big thing, but two, the kids that come into college they're already college wrestlers when they come in at age 7, they're 17 or 18 years old in high school. They've been training with college guys. They've been, wrestling on these world teams, going overseas and wrestling with the best guys in the world. So I just think the high school level at the top has increased so much even since I was in high school, to the point where if I was one of the top guys in high school back in 2010 stepping into a college room, like I was still maybe having a hard time cracking a D1 starting lineup. These days these kids are coming in and they could be national champs as true freshmen, it feels like. And
Right.
it's not just like that's not like an anomaly that I'm compiling a list of guys who have come in and won NCAA titles as freshmen and then never won titles again. I've got like a fairly substantial list. So all that being said, just a guy like Carter going for 5, it's mind blowing just because it's almost easier. It feels like nowadays to win it when you're younger, and as you get older, your body, gets a little more beat down. And then these young hammers come in at age 19 and they're fresh and they're, a world champ already and stuff like that. It almost is harder, it feels like, to be able to have, to defend your title while those guys are nipping at your heels. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. But it's it's amazing to see how high the level of these best high school guys are.
All right, the PennLive Wrestling Podcast moves on. We had a little bit of audio, video, technical difficulty with him towards the very end. But Jimmy, what a great guest. Tristan Warner, 2010, Cumberland Valley grad, wrestled at the Old Dominion, 3-time NCAA qualifier, 2-time winner of the Elite 89 award given to the wrestler with the highest GPA that year. Jimmy, I don't even want to tell the audience what my GPA was at the University of Scranton the last couple of years. I did not have the focus that Tristan did. Let's just put it that way. And I'm happy to have survived that experience academically. But Jimmy, we're almost done here on the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. We were talking with Tristan about what he sees from this current Penn State team, and he hit on a great point that just when you think they can't clear a higher bar, they always seem to do it, and it's not easy to do. This could be Cael's best team ever. That's still got to play itself out in the postseason. But before the show, we were talking about, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Correct me if I'm wrong. The measuring stick for single season excellence, and you can kind of talk about this, is a 2001 Minnesota Golden Gophers who at 10 weights they placed at all 10 weights, and I think Iowa's come close. I think Penn State's come close, and I'm sure the veteran Penn State fans are wondering if it's possible this year for Penn State to do that without going into too big a detail, because they do have some wrestlers that are banged up, including the kid who's number 1 at 157, Tyler Kasak. Just your thoughts on the possibility of that happening.
Well, there's so many intangibles, and yes, injury certainly is the biggest, right? Then there's the flu, right? You never know. Like, right, Kirkfully didn't even make the trip last week, right? So you never know when that's going to come into your room. But I mean, they are certainly positioned to challenge that mark, right? I looked at the rankings today on Flow, and the last 8 guys from 141 through heavyweight are either number one or number
Yeah.
two. Just let that sink in a minute. So the intangibles then are the first two weights, where Luke Lodahl, as Tristan mentioned, dropped to number 9 in this week's rankings, and Braden Davis is number 5. So those two will need very good tournaments, I think, at the NCAAs in order to place among the top 8. And interestingly, Minnesota, they had a couple of 8th placers. They had no champions that year. They were 3rd through 8th. So I can almost guarantee that Penn State's going to have a few champions. So again, if Lillidahl and Davis do well at the Big Tens, get decent seeds at the Nationals, they are positioning themselves to do better there and be part of, a possible 10 All-Americans. So it's certainly possible, but it's a challenge. And it obviously, once in 93 years, it's a challenge.
All right, team. Right before we wrap this up in about a minute or so, Penn State's. I'll see you up at Penn State. We're recording this on a Wednesday, Friday night. Their last dual meet of the regular season. They're wrestling American. It's senior night, and this is not really a match that there's not going to be a lot of suspense. We hope, because last year there was some suspense late, and it was about an injury. Just real quick, I wanted to ask you this before we wrap up the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. What will you remember about this senior group? I know that there's still some wrestling to go, but just some early thoughts about what this senior group has accomplished. I'll probably ask you it again after nationals, but as of right now, it's been an incredible run. What stands out to you about this?
I think the first thing is as long as I've been around, with this group and with the team, is how they are as people. Like Bo Bartlett, Carter Storaci, Kirk Fleet. I believe that includes a senior class, right? Am I missing someone? They are outstanding young individuals, and it's interesting to have watched them come up from the last 5 years or so, or in Carter's case maybe 6. But they are intriguing. Like Bo Bartlett likes to be the philosophy kind of guy, right? And those type of answers, and Carter, a lot of brashness behind him, but he can certainly back that up.
Yep,
Greg doesn't always say a lot, but always has a point, and
he does.
he's one of the better heavyweights I've seen, right? And it should be interesting this year in the Big Tens and the Nationals between him and Gable Stevenson. But it's a class that, and they'll be more honored on Friday night. They usually don't let us know which ones are coming back or which ones have decided to opt out and not and graduate. But as Cael will tell you, I think it's been another good class, and he's always enjoyed being around them, and he just keeps bringing in classes like that, and I think he will continue to do so.
All right, that's it for this edition of the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. Bob Flounders, Jim Carlson. Thanks again to our special guest, Tristan Warner, 2010 Cumberland Valley grad, three-time Old Dominion NCAA qualifier, and 2-time Elite 89 award winner.